brave, I would say. No, some
Well, shit. It's been centuries, hasn't it? Well, as you can tell, I made my reality come true. Look at this. I'm like a god here. My own interdimensional hotel business. Let's go around. This is my place here. Then, my office area. I'm in charge of this hotel. Press play.
mistakes you don't unmake. Excuse me for a minute, will you? This drink isn't going to freshen itself, and I need to steel myself for this next part. Our schedules that summer were scattered and random, but we all lined up a Wednesday to Tuesday stretch we had off and booked it. The house sat on the side of a lake with a beautiful view of the water. Surrounded by trees and fresh air, it was truly the perfect place to rent for a week. I couldn't even see another house when I stood out back. We spent the first night drinking around a bonfire, me trying to work up my courage and failing each time. On Thursday, though, Thursday was the big mistake. We ventured into town to visit the local bar scene, something Scott said someone he bumped into at the gas station recommended. I wish I could remember that night, but it reappears only in bits and pieces, fragments of some other timeline I might have lived in once. I do, however, remember the guy we talked to. Young, our age, someone local, talking about the area. At some point, the story's shifting to scary local legends. He told us about the 13th, some legendary beast that appeared only on Friday the 13th, which the next night happened to be. How it rose from the lake and targeted those who knew about it. We laughed and pretended to be scared. Silence during those moments, I stared off into the distance, losing myself in the past. The shadows on the horizon never left me, though they dimmed with time, storms passing just out of sight. Steve had a kind heart. He thought he could help. And one night, over too many bottles of wine and a meal his wife cooked, I finally broke down and I told them about the 13th. They responded kindly, not believing, no, but recognizing that something horrible had happened in my past, probably imagining that the police had been right, but that my young mind had created some nightmare to explain the things I could not accept. 2 months would pass before the next Friday the 13th, and he never mentioned what I told him again. Still, early that morning, I walked silently to his house and hid a coin and small bottle of alcohol outside behind a bush. I would heed the warnings he wouldn't. I would ensure he remained safe. For once on a Friday the 13th, I fell asleep and slept deeply. I blamed myself for what happened next. I woke up to a few text messages from Steve, a selfie of him draining the bottle, and a message saying that he hoped this would show me I had nothing to worry about, that I could begin to work on processing the death of my friends. Poor Steve. He was a good man. His wife was wonderful. The authorities had no idea what to make of their bodies, found inside a locked house with a deadbolt still engaged, mangled, with lungs full of water. That almost killed me. Well, I certainly drank enough that it might have. I'd go to bars and mouth off, praying someone would be violent enough to do what I was too cowardly to. Got beat a few times, but nothing with the finality I craved. I withdrew, mindlessly diving into the internet, a place I could be drunk and alone. One night I found a thread and it sparked an idea, another bit of life for me. I began searching in earnest, searching for some way to free myself from this. I went down a lot of rabbit holes, found myself facing too many dead ends. But names bubble to the surface over time, familiar ones. When you're hunting for information on some water monster of lore, you can't exactly Google it. You hear about a professor with arcane interest, then hear about him again. The first time you hear a name might be nothing, but by the third, you point your compass towards his campus and head that way. It took 3 tries before he didn't brush me off, but a professor with an obscure interest in triskaidekaphobia, fear of the number 13, couldn't be passed up. I knew I was running out of time. The next Friday the 13th was just 2 days away. So I showed up at his office and blurted out my truth, that I knew why people are afraid of Friday the 13th, and I'd been hunted by it for years. I spent the next 2 nights staying in his guest room as he drilled my mind with questions. I think he feared losing me. I told him about the 13th, and we prepared for that night as I had for years. I wasn't any closer to understanding, but he took copious notes, circling over and over the facts as I knew them. We would speak, and then I would watch him pore over maps, books, records, silently putting something together. The afternoon of the 13th found him in a happy mood. We'd set the wards outside and began waiting for it to appear. This would mark the first time I looked outside. Normally, I hid from its gaze. A celebratory drink led to another, and in a short time the professor finally began filling in the gaps for me, placing my experiences into a broader base of knowledge. I watched the light drain away outside as he began talking. "There have been rumors for thousands of years," he said. He spoke excitedly, the wine loosening his tongue. "Some people will tell you this began at the Last Supper, that some evil had already infected Judas, but I'm telling you this is older than that."
Poison. Head to bed. See you in the morning. Yo. Press play.
It predates Christianity by a great deal. Hammurabi's code amended the 13th law, some reference to the darkness. Lunar cults thought the number 13 to be spiritual, but the number has had power for a long time. "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No one really knows. Some say a beast, some say it's a living curse. It's always been largely kept a secret, because the more people who knew of it, the weaker it became. The few texts that exist always made that clear. On Friday the 13th of October in 1307, King Philip IV of France used it to wipe out Knights Templar. It pops up only here and there afterwards, for hundreds of years. It's old, antediluvian, something left over from before the flood." He paused here. "Every people to ever live on this earth have a flood mythology, cultural memories of water destroying the earth." He trailed off as he refilled his glass. "Something different happened when it came to America. We were founded with 13 colonies, which I believe was some sort of homage to its power, perhaps trying to lure it. There was once a 13 club made up of powerful men. 5 presidents even joined, with the stated purpose of improving the number's reputation. But I think the real purpose was to transport it here, or lure it here. Powerful men have believed they could use it for a long time. His voice picked up as he got more and more excited. In 1915, a German U-boat, SMU-28, sunk the British steamer Iberian. Among the debris, the Germans saw a giant aquatic animal in the wreckage, something resembling a crocodile of monstrous size. I think that represented an attempt to bring it here, and I think it may have succeeded in some way, though perhaps not as contained a matter as some would have hoped. I looked out the window. The sun had completely set. You provided an interesting piece of information, he continued. The coin and the small bottle of alcohol, some offering to protect you. It is driven to kill all who know of its existence, since in the knowing it is weakened. But you've discovered how men used it for so long, the flip side to the curse of the knowledge. One could tell his enemies of it without telling them how to protect themselves, knowing it would hunt them down once they knew. Genius in its simplicity, really. We sat quietly for a moment, considering this. Hitchcock tried to make a movie called Number 13, you know, he began. It fell apart, and the footage vanished. He paused, and I waited for him to resume. He didn't. I need to use the restroom, I said, standing up. It won't be long now. I closed the door and splashed water on my face, staring at my reflection, daring myself to be brave. I remember that sound, a click, and then metal meeting wood. I knew, but still I checked the bathroom door, locked from the outside. Professor? I asked, as though there was a question. Your libation and your coin are outside the bathroom, boy, he answered, and you're safely locked in. It's not safe to be out there, I pleaded. Oh, not for you, no, but I will greet our guest as an old friend. I've known the words for some time, just not how to summon it so I could use them. After this, it will be in my control. I begged through the door, but part of me knew what would happen next. Minutes passed before I heard anything. It sounded like a trickle of water that slowly grew to a roar, and I felt a pressure that reminded me of diving to the bottom of a pool. The professor remained confident in his abilities, and he began chanting words in a language I'm sure died out long ago. I heard his chants grow louder, take on a plaintive tone. I could imagine the thing filling the room before him, with him believing he had some way to stop it. I heard his words stop suddenly, just as I heard the horrible, wet sounds that followed. Time passed again after that night, and I was out of options. I don't know what the professor did wrong, if he spoke the wrong words, or if some other weakness cursed him to a watery death, but there didn't exist much hope for me. The greatest and perhaps only source of information in the world had been snuffed out. So I did what I do best, lose myself in a drink. I don't know how the universe decides to push these things together, whether some greater force nudged me in a certain way, or whether it was simply the luck of a man who'd spent too many evenings in too many filthy bars. I considered the knife in my hand, silver, taken from the professor's study before I left. It had something carved on the blade and seemed very, very old. I don't know why I took it, but it brought me some comfort. The old revolver with bizarre, ancient-looking bullets was in my motel room. There existed no practical way of carrying the giant thing, but they'd seemed important to take, though they might simply be mementos from a man preoccupied with the past. I mostly laid low these days. Grabbing a bunch of stuff from the scene of a violent death has a way of attracting attention, even if the manner of death was so strange. I heard him while I studied the blade, his voice still the same as that first night, only this time the tone remained light-hearted, talking about spring training, pitchers and catchers, truck day, normal life, no tales of darkness and woe. I sat there all night, watching him from across the bar, waiting for him to leave. When he finally did, drunk and tired, I tailed just behind him. Most people are oblivious to these things, men especially, and he remained blissfully unaware of my presence until I pushed him into an alley and pulled a knife, his eyes flickering from surprise to fear. "You killed my friends," I hissed, "and now I'm gonna kill you." His eyes, full of fear a moment before, changed to acceptance. "I deserve this," he began. "I didn't protect your friends well enough." The knife shook in my hand, and he kept talking. His story began in a town hunted by a nightmare the residents didn't understand. They all protected themselves from it, the way a few families had been taught by a stranger decades before. But it found ways to strike the unprepared, the foolish, those who made mistakes. Over time, the residents created an elaborate plan to kill it, but only being able to strike it on Friday the 13th meant months would pass when movement on such a plot remained impossible. In the meantime, the plant in town closed, people left, and those who remained there just tried to hang on to life. His mother had lost hope, and he grew worried that she would stop protecting herself, that she would find it easier to choose to see what lay on the other side than face another day alone. The beast seemed too strong, though. Not enough people knew of it, so he hatched a plan that in his young mind seemed perfect. He decided he'd target a group of tourists. He would lure them into town, protect the house they stayed in, and tell them of the beast. Their safety would be guaranteed, and it would grow weaker in the telling. He would sit unguarded in his home, and when it appeared, he would try to kill it. He didn't know Scott had stumbled across the bottle and the coin, didn't know that even as they sat in the bar that night, Scott had dropped the coin in the bathroom already, that he would do a shot by the jukebox and hand off the empty bottle to me. He didn't know his plan had already failed, and so he sat alone the next night, waiting for a beast that had already focused on more bountiful prey. He finished talking with tears running down his face, and closed his eyes, waiting for what came next. I stared at the tip of the knife, still pointed at him, considering. I stare at the knife tip again now, in his hand. He twirls it as we wait for the beast. Two men who might be able to slay this nightmare once and for all. So now you know, and in that knowledge, it grows weaker. Place a coin and a small bit of libation outside your door tonight, and you'll be safe. It wants me anyway, and my door will remain unguarded and open for the nightmare that will darken it soon. I'm ready for it. And this time I will succeed, or I'll die trying. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.
What is this?
Fall in love with Hungry Jack's new Jack's Fried Chicken Pieces. It's been almost 8 years since I've sat down to retell this story.
Accept or
So
not.
forgive any, stumblings in clarity on my part. Even now, sitting in front of my laptop, a lit joint burning closer to the filter in my right hand, and a bottle of whiskey just beside me on my left, half of both already consumed. As I recall the events of that day, I can feel the familiar tremor starting in my hand, one that I know will only grow more pronounced and difficult to stifle as the memories are brought to the surface. Still, I've spent enough years battling with a decision to share what happened, and more than that, dealing with the consequences it can have, and ultimately, I know now the decision to share my story is the right one. I believe people have the right to know what's out there, and if there's a possibility that I can stop anyone else from going near that place, from going near the shores of Crabbers Bay, I can perhaps prevent that thing that took my brother from hurting anyone else. The fact that other people have fallen victim to the evil of that place, that anyone else has met the same fate as my brother, lingers with me, haunting me nearly as much as the final seconds I saw him, and ultimately saving lives means more to me than the prospective ridicule this may garner, or the pain reliving it will cause. I suppose I should start, lest I manage to convince myself against it, or fall apart before I complete the story. I've got a job to do now, a warning to give, that I wish my brother and I had had when playing near the shores of our beloved lake house. If ever you find yourself in the area, beware the shores of Crabbers Bay, and do not be lured by its strange phenomena, those shores teeming with little arthropods, for they are little more than an omen of something far darker. Beware the cloaked woman who wanders along the shore. I call top bunk. No fair. You got it last time. It's my turn. Dad said. Gonna have to beat me to it then, my brother Ryan said, breaking into a full sprint from the front door and up the stairs before he'd even finished speaking. Ryan was the younger of the two of us by a year, though you wouldn't be able to tell given our appearances or dynamic. He was always the more outspoken and brazen of the two of us, and paired with the fact that he was unusually big for his age, and in more cases than one, find older than him. By the time of our final trip to the lake house, though he was only 11, he stood taller than me and had grown into a pretty brazen kid, never one to want to back down from any challenge, and seemingly goaded by the idea of risk. I suppose because of his size and how he was often treated as a kid much older than he truly was, Ryan felt the need to be the tough kid, to be my protector, even though I should have been his. And because of that, he's gone, and I'm here when it should have been the other way around. It was mid-August, and the end of summer was hurtling closer, evident by the waning hours of sunlight, and the subtle creep of the winter chill in the air, most apparent at night, and our mother and father decided that we ought to take advantage of the rapidly fading benefits of summer, allowing my brother and I one last hurrah before school began, and the unforgiving northeastern winter settled in. My brother and I had thrown our bags together, practically loading the car ourselves when our parents told us that we would be departing that night for our last lake house visit of the summer. The beach house had been in our family for generations, constructed by our great-grandfather, who was also the first person to settle on the shores, the first member of the very community in which it sat, which became Fiddler's Grove, a small but wealthy little village built behind the cover of a thick northeastern forest that entirely hid the several acres of discreet, private shore that would come to be known as Crabber's Bay. The reason for the name was simple. Crabber's Bay had a unique quirk, a phenomenon really, that made it quite unlike any other, and was responsible for the community that had grown around it. When the sun sets, the shores of Crabber's Bay become teeming with creatures of all shapes and sizes, utterly unlike anything you've ever seen. It was something of a tradition of our families, ever since our grandfather had died, to make the drive out to the house that our father had grown up in, within Fiddler's Grove, and appreciate the environment in a way he never had growing up. For my brother and I, it was a time represented by one thing and one thing only: the beach. Our father had grown up with a father who was a kind man, but demanded respect, and maintained one rule with which he was oddly strict: that our father was not to be found anywhere near the shores of the bay, especially near sunset, due to it being dangerous. Reportedly, our grandfather's warm and personable attitude would grow unrecognizably dark the few times my father was caught sneaking out to play near the shores when he was our age, and the punishment that would follow was uncharacteristic. I suppose that's
Stab
partly
or
why
not.
he made such a point of allowing us that joy, and we did find such joy in it. By the time we were passing the city limits of the small coastal town nearest the little village where the beach house was, my brother and I were practically buzzing with excited energy. The scent of sea salt was growing more pronounced, stoking the flames of our excitement even more as the wind whipped in through my brother's side window, opened only halfway at our parents' request, our mom not wanting us to catch something, due to the very present chill in
Boom.
the air. As we neared the house, the sight of the shore ahead and the large gray expanse of water beyond it disappeared behind the trees, and within minutes we'd driven up the long winding driveway that coiled up the hill towards the house like a great stone serpent, and into the shadow the massive old colonial mansion, parking the car under the archway extending between the house and garage. Within minutes, my brother and I had practically tumbled out of the car, and after taking in a breath of salty seaside air mixed with the sweet smell of forest greenery that served as the signature scent of the area, we sped into the house, falling right back into the same argument we had every time we arrived as my brother sped ahead to that bedroom that had once belonged to my grandfather and now served as our guest room. The old house seemed to groan its welcome as our arguing voices and racing footsteps across the old wooden floors and up the winding staircase echoed through those halls, which still felt so cavernous as a child, inundating the sleepy, creaky old colonial on a hillside by the shore with a life it hadn't had since our last visit. My brother raced ahead of strange shape and color, perhaps washing up along with the crabs on the receding tide, as it wasn't unheard of to have some trash wash ashore from the various bodies of waters that emptied into the surrounding ocean. But even with that thought in my mind, the chill I felt almost as soon as I laid eyes on it seemed to linger stubbornly, my gaze brought back constantly to the dark shape at the far end of the beach. Ryan's excited chatter seemed to fade to background noise as he bucketed another crab, my focus on the strange, dark, amorphous shape at the end of the shore. I squinted, as though to bring clarity to what I was seeing. Sure, I must be
And the
mistaken.
blunt.
It seemed to be moving, rising steadily in its place. A shock rippled through me at the utterly unexpected sight, a strange, electrifying side effect of the utter surprise at watching something I'd thought to be inanimate rise with a strange steadiness. Of the immediate flood of explanations and expletives that tore through my mind in that instant, I began to settle in on the idea that it must have been the wind blowing what had to be a massive tangle of seaweed wrapped around something in a way that almost appeared to make the mass seem alive. Something in my mind unwilling to accept that the oddity at the end of the shore was anything to worry about. Unwilling to be distracted from my brother and I's fun on the beach. Yet the longer I looked, utterly unable to break my gaze from the unidentifiable mass, the greater the cold, eerie sensation in me began to grow like the swelling tide, and as it began its glacial approach, my belief in the wind theory was destroyed as quickly as it had been formed. Ryan? I began, my voice breaking slightly, curiosity with an inexplicable hint of fear audible in my tone. Yeah? He breathed, sand all over his hands and his left cheek as he turned to face me, one eyebrow raised, as if to ask why I wasn't digging through the sand with him. My stomach turned as the shape seemed to shuffle forward, its movement slow, methodical, and uneven. I could practically feel the gears turning in my head as my mind threw out suggestion after suggestion to identify just what I was seeing, all of which seemed to fall flat, only furthering the cold feeling energies within me. Ryan picked up on the hesitancy in my response, his face shifting from excitement to a look of bewilderment and confusion, until he followed my gaze along the shore. His expression shifted quickly, utter confusion giving way to curiosity and bewilderment in an instant. What the hell? He muttered, rising to his feet, brushing off the remaining sand from his knees. What is that? His question made something drop within me, plummeting into a strange pit opening in my chest. Something about hearing what I was seeing confirmed, eerily disturbing. I nearly jumped out of my skin as I felt something brush along the top of my bare foot, then again against my legs, letting out a yelp of surprise as I leaped back, finding what felt like the one clear patch of sand in the area as I fell, narrowly avoiding stepping on the briny shell of a massive blue crab underfoot, just one of a slow but noticeable trail of crustaceans flowing towards the opposite side of the shore. From such a distance, the shape of the thing approaching was indiscernible, and my mind shot forth a myriad of suggestions, convinced of each for only the couple of seconds it took to realize it was false, shifting from a large dog, somehow